Welcome to Tying Flies, Imitating Insects. I am Jan Nemec, Angler Education for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Real quick, some housekeeping things. If you have any questions at all through this seminar, please enter them in the Q&A box below. We are turning off the chat for this. The way this is going to kind of work is I'll share some slides, kind of some background on fly tying, and then we'll put together a fly. So let's get started. All right, so once again, tying flies, imitating insects. Quick background, introduction here. My name is Jan, again, Nemec. I am Angler Education for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. My highlights here, once upon a time, I wrote a book on fly fishing Nevada, which is the Fly Fisher's Guide to Nevada there, and currently am a fly designer for one of the larger fly manufacturers in the world. Everybody's got to have a hero shot, so this is certainly how I like to start the seminar. That's probably the only big fish I've ever caught in my career, but it's a good one, that is for sure. So breaking it down, fly and fishing. Fly, I think everybody knows what fishing is. After fish, catching fish, looking for fish. Fly is kind of definitely the complicated part. And real quick, fly to me is a fishing lure that imitates natural foods, oftentimes constructed out of natural feathers and fur, in addition to synthetic materials like foam. We use foam on flies. It's a bare hook wrapped with thread, and the thread is used to secure the different types of materials to the hook. And it kind of is, it's a process. It is a process. Multiple materials are secured to the fly and kind of put together in a different number of combinations to create these, and sometimes art. Okay, so definitely good to clarify. We've got two types of flies, and this is definitely one of the first questions that seems to come up, and that is we have dry flies, or flies that float, and then we have sinking flies, or flies that sink, or sinking flies or wet flies, excuse me. Some differences real quick to point out on these two. The dry flies or the floating flies are very fluffy, and they're tied on very light wire hooks. So if you look at how heavy the wire itself on the hook is, it's definitely made for floating. Whereas the sinking flies sometimes have metal beads on them, as well as that really heavy hook to it. Okay, again, the word fly. We're going to go directly to as in insect. So fly fishing, referring to fly and a fly's life cycle. So here we have a mayfly that starts from the far left of your screen. Excuse me. It is a nymph, and it's a nymph, or it's a bug under the water for about a year before it finds its way to the water surface, where it hatches and flies away. And it lives with wings flying above the surface for about 2 or 3 days. So it lives for a year underwater and spends 2 to 3 days above water before it dies again on the surface where it lays its eggs. And then the whole cycle starts again. The word fly, again, comes from referring to the part of the insect itself. Let's take a look at some flies here. So we have some specific insects. We've got a caddisfly here, and I've got on the far left an actual caddisfly nymph, so that bug that lives under the water, paired with a fly imitation there next to it in the middle of the screen. Next to that, we have a blade of grass, and there's the actual insect there on the blade of grass, and then the dry or floating fly there above it. Some other insects you definitely should be familiar with. The damselfly, our state insect. This is a excellent fly choice for our area. Obviously, they are everywhere. We've got the subsurface, or the insect that lives underwater there on the far right. In the middle of the screen, that subsurface, or that insect that lives underwater, crawling up on a leaf, and that bug actually hatches into that beautiful blue dancing damsel that we have there. And there's a fly right above it that represents a fly that fish will eat, just like they eat the damsels. Dragonfly is another one that a lot of people are familiar with. Far left there, that is a scary looking bug, but those beautiful dragonflies that are around every lake that you visit start out looking really kind of scary under the surface. That on the left is a dragonfly nymph, so the subsurface insect, and then the fly there on the right that represents that bug under the water. So another fly definitely to point out are terrestrials. Terrestrials are everywhere, grasshoppers and ants. You see them everywhere, and fish eat them as well. So we definitely tie flies to represent those insects. There you can see a grasshopper on some sagebrush there, and a fly, another terrestrial insect, an ant. And it's real easy to tell they're at it with those two kind of big segmented bodies there, just like an ant. All right, definitely another important food source that we find in bait fishing. Bait fishing is productive as it is because fish eat worms, and fly fishermen tie worms as well. So we've got a couple worms there tied up on hooks that are kind of bent so they look kind of creepy and slinky like a worm. Leech also are in that category as well, which not a lot of people know, but fish love to eat leech, and you will find leech in most of the lakes in our area, especially. All right, on to the fun ones. So as a fly tyer, I like tying the big flies. So some of the larger food sources like the crayfish. Here I have a big crayfish laying on a rock, and then two flies there that represent a couple different sizes of crayfish. Fish love to eat crayfish. Fish also love to eat fish. There we have a sculpin, or a bottom feeder. It's kind of like an algae eater fish, but not exactly an algae eater, bottom feeder. Lives on the bottom of most of our rivers here in the area. The fly below it is a representation of that bait fish, or that bottom feeder. Another bait fish, we have a tui chub, found out at Pyramid Lake. It's a bait fish that really likes to take over. So they really have a tendency to overproduce. So when you find them, you have a tendency to find a lot of them. So out at Pyramid Lake, there's lots of them. The fish eat lots of them. That fly is kind of a good general representation of that chewy chub bait fish. So you kind of see the white underside body with that olive top to the fly. Again, some of the more fun flies to tie, reptiles. So bass fishing, bass eat reptiles. They eat snakes, they eat frogs, they eat lizards, they eat anything that they can get their mouth around. This, you can see a snake kind of swimming out to the lily pads there. I did not witness a fish eating that, but I heard an awful big thump during that day, and I can't imagine it was anything else other than a big fish eating one of those snakes. The fly there, you see next to it, is a frog pattern, and fish absolutely eat frogs. That is constructed almost all of natural materials. The front of the fly, or the fly where the head of the frog is actually made of deer hair. So it's deer hair that's put very, very close together and then trimmed or cut to make the shape of a head. Some other fun flies to tie, and fish eat mammals, mice and birds. So that is a mouse there in front of you. Definitely one of the more fun flies to tie, tail and all. It floats on the surface and would represent a mouse swimming or running across the top of the water, depending on how big of the fish is that's chasing it. Hung up here. Excuse me just a second. Try this again. There we go. Okay, so we went from a mouse to a work of art. Fly tying, in addition to creating lures that fish eat, is also an artistic representation. This is a full-dressed salmon fly, which was originally created at least 100 years ago, probably closer to about 200 years ago. They were tied with very, very exotic bird materials, and obviously very, very colorful. There is no insects in nature that are quite that bright, or they'd be eaten pretty quick. So there is a world of art when it comes to fly tying. A few more of those flies. On the top there, we've got the green highlander. I don't remember the name of the middle one. And then on the bottom there, we've got what's called a Nicholson. Again, flies that were originally created a couple hundred years ago. Special note, that fly in the middle, some of the materials, the feathers on the main part of the body are closest to the hook that are yellow with the red tips are actually fake or imitation materials for a bird that has gone extinct. So there's a lot of materials now that exist that were originally put into some of these flies 200 years ago that the animals that were made are no longer around. A couple more, there's called the shannon and a traherne, if I'm not mistaken. The shannon has a parrot feather for the wing. Okay, so let's start looking at fly tying itself and how we put flies together. So our basic tool assortment there consists of the big thing in the middle, which is the vise, which holds our hook. I've got laying on the white mat a bobbin, which has the thread of spool, which is what we use to secure the materials to that hook, a pair of scissors to trim the material kind of places that we need, as well as just some super glue. This is what I would consider to be a basic toolkit for fly tying. Okay, so get your toolkit, what's next? The first answer, the easy answer is YouTube. There are a bazillion flies, tie some flies, fly to some ties. It's easy to get those two mixed up. YouTube, as well as our own website, you can find links to different flies, as well as some basic instruction. We actually have a 6-part basic instruction series on our website or Facebook, as well as YouTube site that will certainly get you headed the right direction. So the photographs here on this kind of show the construction of a fly, basic construction. This is a beetle for Pyramid Lake. Really bright fly. I like the bright materials. It's just real easy to see kind of for demonstration purposes here. We've got the thread kind of wrapped on the hook, and then we have each section is working from the hook bend or from working from left to right. So we start adding materials at the rear of the hook and we slowly work forward. And with that being said, we are going to tie our first fly. Which is the woolly bugger. It's a little rough with the webcam, but we are going to make the best out of it. So the woolly bugger streamer is a wet fly, so it's a sinking fly, and it is a fly that represents just about everything that's a larger food source for trout, bass, a lot of different fish species. You could almost change the color of this fly and make it just about anything you want. Again, it is a little bit larger fly, but big flies catch big fish. This one is an olive. This would be an excellent color for imitating baitfish or imitating some of the darker leech that, again, you'll find in our lakes and reservoirs. Okay, I'm going to start by putting a hook in. And it's secured, super strong jaws there. It's not going anywhere. I can bend the hook before I can pull it out. I'm going to secure some thread or use the thread to start wrapping and build kind of a foundation across the whole flat part of the hook. After I get that foundation down, this is not fast forward. I swear, this is real time. I tie about 10 to 15,000 flies a year, so I definitely have plenty of practice. Okay, so we have 3 materials that are going to go into our woolly bugger. We have the tail, which is called marabou. It is an under feather from a turkey. So we've got turkey. The other feather that we're going to use is the hackle, or kind of this spiky material here in the fly. And that looks like just a normal feather. You'll see how that one goes in. And finally, the body, or the inside material, is called chenille. And you might recognize that if you are familiar with knitting and kind of crafting stuff. I think it's used for making blankets. So here we go. The woolly bugger streamer, we've got our foundation with thread, and I'm going to put my tail in. So I want the tail to be about the same length as the body, so we'll give it a good kind of measurement there. We've got our tail secured. So all the way down the whole back, trim what we don't need. Next is our body, our chenille. We're going to put that in the same place. Remember, we're working from the hook bend to the eye. So we're always working from left to right or back to front. Again, just like that tail, I'm going to secure that right on top of the hook. And we're going to set that aside just for a second so we can get our hackle feather in. Our hackle feather is going to go in tip first. So it looks like that. This is actually feather from a rooster. And that one's going to go right on top of where I put that body one, tip first. So we have a mess of materials kind of stacked up there. I promise it'll be pretty in the end. Okay, so first up, I've got these 2 I need to deal with. I'm going to start by wrapping the body. So I'll take my body material, the chenille, and I'm going to start wrapping from left to right, covering up the thread that I had placed to make that foundation. It's important that you cover that thread up because you really want it to be durable. And if you can cover it up with the chenille and or the hackle, it helps to keep it incredibly durable. So I'm going to make 1 wrap next to the last till I get to the eye, or close to the eye. And I'm going to secure that. So I'm going to make a couple wraps behind it that just kind of taps it down or secures it down. Now that that's secure, I can cut it without it unraveling. And we're going to wrap our hackle forward. So our hackle is going to go not 1 wrap next to the last, but we're going to space this out a little bit. You see on our woolly bugger streamer, there's a little bit of a gap between each one of the wraps. And that's so you can kind of see that underbody. So it makes the fly stay a little bit slender or skinny. Okay, so 1 wrap, a little bit away from the last, all the way to the front of the eye. And just like I secured that body material, I'm going to secure the hackle and trim it. Just make a few last wraps to pretty it up. And that is our woolly bugger streamer. One little knot at the end there. We'll add our glue just to make sure it doesn't fall apart. All right, if you guys have any more questions at all, please feel free to fire away.
We do have a question about what is your favorite fish and your favorite insect?
Excellent. So I think my favorite insect is probably golden stoneflies. So it's a stonefly that we have on the Truckee River that lives basically from the town of Reno up into the town of Truckee. It's one of the largest insects that we have. And it's really fun to fish because the fish are very, very aggressive when they take them. So they're not shy about eating them, is the best way to put it. My favorite fish is probably the brown trout. The reason being is a big part of it is their size. They get very, very big and very aggressive, and they're kind of known as the brute trout, but as well as how hardy they are. They're tough fish. They are tough fish. So yes, they're strong, but they're there to last. So they're not going anywhere. They're such a tough fish. That's one I mostly respect, I guess.
Awesome. And then just one last question, because we are out of time. When did you start tying flies? Uh-oh, it looks like we might have lost Jan, everybody. It looks like his camera froze up, but we are just about out of time. So we're gonna go ahead and end this one. And we hope to see you. We've got one more session if you wanna learn some more about fish. All right, thanks everyone.